12, we talk about informal business reports. So, interpreting digital age data. In today's day and age, collecting information is pretty much effortless. With programs and different analytical items, getting data is actually pretty easy. We have computers and we can scan the world for data. However, making sense of that data is a lot harder. Unprocessed data become meaningful through skillful sorting, analysis, combination, and recombination. Tabulating and analyzing data. Tables are used for systematic columns and rows. Correlations are relationships between variables. Measures of central tendency, the mean or the average, median, the middle point in a range of values, and mode, the most frequent value. Decision matrices, these are grids that allow comparisons among different weighted criteria. Grids are actual boxes of rows and columns to sort data. And these are all used together to tabulate and analyze data. So is it a coincidence or correlation? When researchers tabulate and analyze data, relationships among two or more variables may emerge that help explain the findings. However, when you do this, proceed with caution. Are these variables truly related? Does a causal relationship exist? Apparent correlations can stimulate investigation and present possible solutions. However, it may simply be coincidence, not correlation. So, when drawing report conclusions, you are to interpret and summarize your findings, basically telling us what your findings meant. Contextualize it. Relate the conclusions to report the problem. Focus only on conclusions that help solve the original problems. And if it doesn't have anything to do with the original problem, don't report on it. Limit the conclusions to the data presented. Do not introduce new material. Be objective. Avoid exaggerating or manipulating the data to prove a point or showing any bias. Use consistent criteria. In evaluating options, use the same criteria for each alternative. That's truly the only way that you'll have unbiased conclusions. And then enumerate each conclusion. Number and list each item. Present each conclusion in parallel form and how you reach those conclusions. Making report recommendations. Well, first thing you need to do is suggest actions. What specific procedures can help solve the report problem? Focus in on recommendations that are practical and agreeable. Suggest feasible actions that would be acceptable to the audience. Also, present recommendations separately. Enumerate each in a statement beginning with a verb. For example, invest half the income in growth funds. See how we used a verb to begin it? Finally, describe how to implement the recommendations if requested. So we talked about the recommendations. Now let's talk about how to implement those recommendations. Report conclusions and recommendations. A conclusion is the raw materials. A conclusion, for example, is the raw materials used in smartphones often come from war-torn countries and are extracted under dangerous conditions, often by children. You see how that is in conclusion? It is straight to the point and draws upon a final conclusion. Whereas a recommendation example would be create fair trade smartphone that is not manufactured from polluting conflict metals mined by children. So the recommendation is different than a conclusion. Make sure that you understand the difference between both. Title. Arrange data by chronological order. For example, 2017, 2018, 2019. Or organize a report by component. Maybe arrange data by classification such as location, geography, division, product, or part. Also, you can organize reports by importance. Order data from most important to least important, or vice versa. Recommendation is always most important to least important, but you can do both. Providing reader cues. It's important to include headings. Create headings that are parallel. For example, creating team motivation, treating employees like customers. Not employees should be treated like customers. You see how those headings are in parallel? Integrate headings gracefully, right? Do not repeat the heading in the following sentence. Avoid customer surveys. These are. So make sure that you don't repeat the heading in a sentence below. Organizing report information. Maybe organize it by criteria. Arrange data by evaluative categories. For example, in a report comparing iPad and other tablets, organize it by the price, warranty, size, screen resolution, and more. Organize by convention. Organize the data according to the prescribed categories. Proposals, for example, are organized by staff, budget, and schedule, and so forth. Provide reader cues. For instance, provide an introduction. This discusses the purpose of the report and the significance of the topic. It previews the main points in the order of development. Use transitions as well. And transitions are words that transition to another point. However, on the contrary, therefore, or moreover, again, are transitions. Providing reader cues. Write short but clear headings. Experiment with wording that tells who, what, where, when, and why, the 6 W's. And include at least one heading per report page. Types of headings that are out there. There's functional headings, such as an executive summary, introduction, findings, or discussions. And then there's talking headings. Examples are the best business laptop money can buy. Tablet computers displace notebooks. Texting, the new smoking gun. What's new in social media? You see how these differ? Talking headings are often very popular with web because they're rich with keywords. Combination headings, using a traditional heading such as background and then using a talking heading in addition to it. Informational report content. The introduction. Identify the report and its purpose. Present a brief overview of the report's organization, especially for longer reports. And provide a brief background information when readers are unfamiliar with the topic, maybe a definition. In the report body, group facts or findings into 3 or 5 roughly equal discrete segments. Organize it by the time, component, importance, criteria, convention, or some other method. And supply functional or talking heads, at least one per page, to describe each section and to separate them. Use an informal, conversational writing style unless the audience expects a formal tone. Use bullets, either numbered and letterless, headings, underline items, and white space to enhance readability. In your summary and conclusion, when necessary, briefly review the main points and discuss what action will follow. If relevant, express appreciation to describe your willingness to provide further information. Typical informational reports include periodic or activity reports, trip, convention, and conference reports, progress and interim reports, and investigation reports. So, an analytical report consists of an introduction, explaining why the report was written. For research studies, it's important that you include the significance, scope, limitations, methodology of the investigation. You want to make sure that you preview the report's organization and summarize in conclusions and recommendations for receptive audiences. In the body, discuss the pros and cons of each alternative. For receptive audiences, make sure to consider placing the recommended alternate last. Establish a criteria to evaluate alternatives. In Yardstick studies, create a criteria to use in measuring each alternative consistently. Support the findings with evidence, facts, stats, expert opinions, survey data, and other proof. Use headings, enumerations, lists, tables, and graphics to help focus emphasis. And finally, in the conclusions and recommendations, develop a reasonable conclusion that answers the research question. Justify the conclusions with highlights from the findings. Also make recommendations if asked. Use action verbs and explain the recommendations that need explaining. Some typical short analytical reports include justification and recommendation reports, feasibility reports, and yardstick reports.